Hi, my name is Greg Burson. I am 26 years old, and this September 30th to be exact, will mark the 10-year anniversary of my mother's passing and the end of her battle and fight with ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. To both, honor her memory and to celebrate her life, I am going to be completing my own sort of ultra endurance type event this September. When I was 11 years old and my brother was 8, my mother was diagnosed with ALS at the age of 35 years old. She passed when I was 16 years old, and ALS is just a truly horrible, vicious disease that it cannot be described with words alone. Its impact cannot be, words cannot do justice the, impact that a disease like that, can have on people that come in contact with it. But that was the hand that my mother was dealt. And, I watched as, she lost every physical capability that she had. ALS is a disease that attacks the nervous system and the brain's ability to work with the body to carry out, physical, commands and abilities that we take for granted on a, daily basis. So, I watched as my mother lost the ability to walk, the ability to talk, the ability to, even swallow or breathe without, assistance or, discomfort. She essentially became, trapped in her own body. And while dealing with this, indescribable amount of, pain and suffering, the ALS, it never touched her mind. It never took her smile, her spirit, her heart, her faith, or her enjoyment for life. In the face of just indescribable adversity, she carried herself with a level of, poise and grace that, I don't think I will ever be able to, to understand or, fully appreciate. She was able to transcend such an awful disease and still be able to have a positive and meaningful impact on those around her. People would come by and hope to, lift her spirit, but they would leave with their spirits lifted. They would leave with a greater appreciation for what they have and, greater perspective. She was able to take something so horrible and just through her attitude and her acceptance alone was able to create something good out of it. And, that's what I'm, hoping to do in some way with this event. I want to take something that was so horrible and so painful, and that held me back for such a long time, and be able to create some value, to create something good. And the reason I'm doing this event is for my mother, but also to raise money for the Joe Martin ALS Foundation, a nonprofit organization based out of Charlotte that helps families that are dealing with ALS. They do so at no cost, and they're just tremendous people, and they care, so much about the person that's actually dealing with the disease, but also with the families. They're a community. They provide so much support, and they do so, like I said, cost-free. So in-home care, helping with things like home alterations, transportation, and providing emotional support, which it's just it, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but I want to raise money for this foundation because of what they meant to my mother and my family. And I contacted them earlier this year with the idea of doing a marathon for the 10-year anniversary. But then I thought I wanted to do something more, something that would be even more of a challenge, that would push me even harder, something that would be less mainstream, something that would be unique towards me and towards my reason for doing something like this. I decided that I would do a 12-hour time limit where I would be doing as many miles and as many push-ups as I possibly could. 100 push-ups for every single mile that I do, and it's just going to be me by myself. So no race, no external motivation, unless anybody wants to come out and watch me as I put myself through a bit of suffering. There's nothing that I can do that would even come close to the level of suffering that my mother dealt with, or that anybody with ALS dealt with. So I feel like I can put myself through something grueling and monotonous and challenging for half a day, especially if it can do some level of good. This is a perspective and attitude that I've not always had. When I was 16 and my mother passed, I struggled immensely. ALS, it weighed so heavily on me throughout my adolescence, from the time that I was 11 to 16, that I was just so drained once it was over, once my mother passed. I was so tired of dealing with it. It consumed my life. I let it kind of define me. I spent every single moment that I could with my mother, at home, just knowing that was the only time that I was ever going to have. And while that made the transition after the fact, I think, more difficult and maybe even more painful, I wouldn't trade a moment of it, because that was the only time that I was ever going to have. So once she was gone, I was dealing with this kind of amalgamation of emotion. I was happy that she was no longer forced to suffer, but then I felt guilty for feeling that way. And then I felt guilty for wanting her back, even if it wasn't the state that comes with ALS. So it wasn't rational, but I needed to grieve. I needed to work through that pain and all that emotion. But like I said, I was drained, and I wasn't ready to deal with that. I just wanted to be normal. I just wanted to be happy. So I ran from all of that. I tried to distract myself, but that sort of pain and grief and even anger, it doesn't evaporate. It was just left to kind of simmer under the surface, and it led me to run from anything that would make me vulnerable, anything that had any real meaning, meant that it could be potentially taken away. It would make me vulnerable. It would make me emotional, and those feelings could come out, those walls could be broken down. So, I just, like I said, I ran, and it got to the point where it broke me. That grief and sadness and anger, it consumed me, and I dropped out of college when I was a freshman, and just sort of collapsed into myself and hit a point of rock bottom, and got to the point where I couldn't even function properly. I ended up going and seeing a grief counselor, and that was one of the hardest decisions that I had to make, to admit that I needed that, to face those emotions, to let them resurface, to work through them. It's the hardest thing that I've ever had to do. And one of the things that helped me was fitness. It gave me some sort of control. I could control when I worked out, how hard I worked out, what I ate. I was able to create sort of a foundation and give my life some structure while going to a grief counselor, while working through those emotions. And it was a long process, and a process where it sometimes felt like I was getting worse, and that was as a result of letting it build up for such a long time. But once I was able to work through a lot of those issues, I was able to abstract some value from my experience, to be able to abstract value out of having watched my mother deal with something with such courage, and to be able to abstract value gave that suffering meaning. And once I had and was able to apply meaning to what had happened, I was able to start recovering, and the suffering lessened. And I was able to, I wouldn't even say regain control of my life, because it was something that I don't know that I ever had. I felt so broken and lost, and I was, in essence, because that's what I believe. Those were the limits that I put on myself. And now I'm at a place where I feel like that person that I was is gone. I feel like I have, control, and that I have passion, and that I have goals and perspective and a drive that I don't know that I would have otherwise, found had, ALS never impacted my life. And, I will never say that, I'm glad that it happened, because it led me to where I am today, but I feel like I've been given something of value, something that I have an obligation to, share. And that if I can use something, like I said, so negative, something so horrible, and be able to create good out of it, it would mean the world to me, and to my mother, and it would give meaning towards what she went through and the person that she was. So if people would be able to donate just a little bit, or would be able to share this video, to send it to somebody, and hopefully something that I've said has maybe resonated with you, it would just mean the absolute world to me, and to the Joe Martin ALS Foundation, to help them be able to continue to provide the tremendous amount of care and support that they do. That would just be fantastic. And in the interest of time, I will, conclude this video, because, I could continue to speak for hours and hours, but, yeah, that's all I have to say. If you've made it this far, I thank you for even, listening to me.